We're tackling political science today.
We'll look at the theories, the structures. By the end, you'll have a clearer view of the political landscape, both the big picture and in your own life.
Okay, so basics first. One source we're using defines politics as getting people to do things. And here's the kicker, especially things they don't want to do.
Interesting.
And it got me thinking, isn't that kind of everywhere? Not just government stuff. My boss making me work late, or a friend guilt-tripping me into helping them move. Is that politics too?
That's a great observation. It shows how political science goes way beyond elections and laws. The core elements, government and power, they're not just in official institutions.
So government, it's like the framework, the actual buildings, rules, all that. Legislatures, courts, that's what I'm picturing.
Yeah, precisely. Those are the gears in our machine, but then there's power, the energy flowing through everything.
And it's not just about forcing people, right?
It's not just coercion, though that's one type. It's also influence, persuasion, even just having info others don't.
This professor we're looking at, he makes a cool analogy, comparing types of power to energy sources.
Oh, I like that.
So there's coercive power. That's
Yeah.
like the coal plant of politics. Maybe not pretty, but it gets stuff done. Then reward power, offering stuff to get people on board. More like solar panels, maybe?
I see it. More sustainable, perhaps.
Definitely. And so many more. Informational power, like controlling data, like wind power, maybe. Unpredictable, but strong in the right conditions.
Right. And then there's the charismatic power, inspiring people through personality, a vision. That's almost like nuclear power. Super powerful, but could be dangerous if mishandled.
Definitely working on my own charismatic power. But seriously, this energy analogy is super helpful, makes these abstract ideas way more concrete.
I agree.
So how does this apply to us, everyday people, not politicians? Where do we see these power dynamics?
Now, that is the key question. And it shows why understanding this stuff matters. Because it's not just in some far-off Capitol building. It's all around us constantly. Your workplace, your community groups, your family even.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Who gets to make decisions?
Mm-hmm.
Who controls resources? Who shapes the narrative?
Oh, wow, yeah. Even something simple like deciding where to eat with friends. There's power dynamics there. Who picks the restaurant? Who compromises? Who always gets their way?
You got it. And once you see those dynamics, you realize how they affect your life. And more importantly, you can think about how to handle them. So, moving on from individual dynamics, let's look at how they get organized on a bigger scale through political structures.
Because power doesn't just float around, it's shaped by the systems we build. This professor uses the military as an example. Makes sense to me.
Yes, the military hierarchy shows how structure defines the flow of power perfectly. You have that chain of command info going from top to bottom. It's efficient, like a well-oiled machine.
Yeah.
But our source points out there are downsides too.
Yeah, too much top-down control, that can be bad news. What happens when people at the bottom, the ones actually doing the work, can't make decisions or share what they know?
Exactly. That's a critical point. And it connects to accountability. Hierarchies work sometimes, but they can also stifle creativity, limit input.
Even lead to abuses of power.
Absolutely. Which takes us back to that power is everywhere idea. It's not just in government or the military, it's in how we live, how we interact.
It's woven into the fabric of everything.
Exactly. And that challenges the traditional view of political science. Some argue that politics isn't just government. It's fundamentally about these power dynamics. And those exist wherever people interact. One source has this fascinating grid where power intersects with all these structures in society, economy, culture, relationships even.
So it's not just that politicians have power. It's like power is constantly moving around, shaping how we work, consume, even think.
Precisely. And this idea has been explored by thinkers like Foucault, feminist scholars. They say power dynamics are in our language, our norms, even how we understand knowledge itself. It's a pretty big shift in perspective.
Okay, I'm definitely seeing things differently now. If power is everywhere, then understanding how it works, how to spot it, how to use it responsibly, that becomes even more important, right?
It does indeed. And that brings us to another question. How do we actually see these power dynamics play out in different settings? We've talked about this political energy grid. Let's zoom in and explore a few key points on that grid, starting with something most people experience firsthand: local politics.
Okay, so picture a town council meeting. Elected officials representing different neighborhoods, different interests, trying to make decisions that affect everyone in the community.
Exactly.
We're talking zoning, schools, local taxes, stuff that hits close to home. So how do those decisions actually get made? Is it just whoever shouts the loudest or rallies the most people?
Passion definitely plays a role. But effective local politics often comes down to something more subtle.
Like what?
Coalition building. Our sources point to that a lot.
Coalition building. Okay.
Think of it as a mini version of the whole political system. You've got different groups, each with their own goals. The skill is finding common ground, making compromises, coming up with solutions that work for lots of different people.
So it's not just about winning, it's about making the system work for everyone. That sounds a lot more cooperative than the national stuff we see.
You're right, it is. It's a good reminder that politics isn't always about those big ideological battles. At the local level, there's a real focus on pragmatism, finding solutions that actually benefit the whole community.
Makes sense. But, okay, let's zoom out a bit. What about the national level? Things get way more complicated there, right?
Definitely. The scale changes drastically, and so does the complexity.
We're not just talking about potholes and park permits anymore.
Now it's policies that impact millions, even billions of people. At the national level, you have this whole network of institutions, different players, competing interests, political parties fighting for power, legislatures debating and passing laws, the executive branch putting those laws into action, and the judicial system interpreting them.
It's like a whole ecosystem constantly changing.
Exactly. Power is constantly being negotiated, contested, shifted around in all sorts of ways.
And don't forget all the other players in the game. Lobbyists, special interest groups, the media. Everyone trying to influence things, get the outcome they want.
Yes, and understanding those influences is key to understanding national politics. One of our sources talks about political behavior, trying to figure out what motivates people, what information they use, and how that shapes their choices.
So it's not just about, like, cold calculations of power.
It's also about the human side of it, the hopes, fears, biases, even aspirations that drive people's political actions.
It's what makes politics so unpredictable.
Absolutely, and so fascinating. But to understand it, it helps to focus on certain institutions that structure the whole process. In a democracy, for example, elections are crucial.
They decide who holds power, right? How that power gets used.
Exactly. Elections are how we choose our leaders. But it's not as simple as just getting the most votes.
There's more to it.
Oh, yeah. How those votes are counted, how districts are drawn up, the different electoral systems, all of that can change the outcome.
So savvy politicians know how to work the system, basically.
You could say that. They understand the nuances, the rules of the game. It's like chess. You have to think ahead, anticipate your opponent, use your pieces strategically.
Okay. I'm seeing the strategy side of it now. But voters aren't just pawns, right? They have their own reasons for supporting certain people or policies.
Absolutely. Voters have their own agency.
And when their needs aren't being met, when the government isn't delivering what people want, that's when you see problems, right? Unrest, instability, demands for change.
Exactly. Political systems, especially democracies, are supposed to be responsive to the people. When they fail to do that, when power gets too concentrated or ignores the majority, that's when you see challenges to the system itself.
It makes sense. So all of this, how does it play out on the global stage? We've talked local, national, but what happens when it's whole countries interacting, not just individuals?
That's when we move into international relations. The stakes are higher, the impact is wider.
And it's way more complex, I imagine.
It is. Instead of city councils or legislatures, now we're looking at international organizations, treaties, alliances, things that shape the entire world. And the idea of power takes on a whole new meaning.
So it's not just about military strength or a strong economy anymore.
It's also about diplomacy, soft power, influencing global opinion, even controlling the narrative on the world stage.
Okay, so there are a lot of different levers to pull.
There are. And one of the biggest challenges is that, unlike within a country, there's no one in charge globally. No world government to enforce rules or settle disputes. So countries have to figure out this complex system through cooperation and competition, always trying to balance their own interests with the need for global stability.
It's like a giant puzzle where all the pieces keep moving.
That's a great way to put it. It's a constant balancing act between national interests, global challenges, and trying to avoid conflict. One source even says the international system is inherently anarchic. There's no global police force, no ultimate court to settle things.
So countries rely on their own strength, their alliances, and their ability to negotiate to navigate this whole thing.
Exactly.
Sounds a bit like the Wild West, but with diplomats and summits instead of cowboys and saloons.
You could say that. And just like in the Wild West, sometimes things go wrong, diplomacy breaks down, and we see conflict.
Which makes me wonder what actually leads countries to war. Is it always about resources or territory, or is there more to it?
Conflicts can come from a whole mix of things: ideological differences, economic competition, historical grievances, ethnic or religious tensions. Sometimes it's even just the perception of a threat or wanting national glory.
So it's complicated.
Very often, it's not just one thing, but a bunch of events, miscalculations, and long-standing rivalries that push nations towards conflict.
So the human element plays a big role even on that scale.
Absolutely. Passions, fears, ideologies. All of those influence leaders' decisions, and sometimes those decisions have terrible consequences. Understanding that complexity, seeing the patterns of history, and knowing how to reduce tensions and build understanding is crucial if we want a more peaceful world. That's where things like conflict resolution and peace studies come in. They use the insights of political science to encourage dialogue, address underlying problems, and find ways to break the cycles of violence that have been around for, well, forever.
This is all fascinating, but also a bit overwhelming, to be honest. We've gone from town council meetings to global issues, from individual power dynamics to the complexities of war and peace. It's a lot to take in.
It is. But that's what's so interesting about political science. It embraces all of this complexity, encourages us to think critically about the world, and helps us understand the forces shaping our lives, locally and globally.
That sounds really interesting. I'm really curious about the ideas behind it all. What drives people's political choices? The beliefs, the values.
That's where political ideology comes in. It's key to understanding the whole landscape.
Yeah.
Think of it like a framework, a set of principles that shape how you see things, how you make decisions, not just in politics, but in life in general.
Like a mental map.
Or a guide, yeah.
But there are different maps, right? Some people take the scenic route, others want the fastest way there. Is that what we see with different ideologies?
Exactly. And in the world of political ideologies, there are lots of different routes. Our sources mention a few big ones. Liberalism, all about individual rights and limited government. Conservatism, often valuing tradition, social order. Then you've got socialism, focusing on equality, social justice. And libertarianism, which really prioritizes individual liberty above everything else.
Okay, that's helpful to have those categories. But it can't be that simple, right? Not everyone fits neatly into one box.
Of course not. Within each ideology, there's a whole spectrum of views. Plus, these ideologies aren't static. They change over time, adapt to new situations. What was radical 100 years ago might be totally mainstream today.
That's true. Makes me think about how our own experiences shape our views, too. It's not just about reading a book and picking an ideology, right? Your family, where you grew up, religion, even just the people you're around, all of that affects how you see things.
Absolutely. Our sources talk about the role of identity in shaping political views. Your social class, race, ethnicity, gender, cultural background, they all matter. It's not just abstract ideas, it's how those ideas connect to your actual life, who you are, where you fit in society.